Guys, imagine yourself that you are riding a bike in an evening on an empty road, and you see that in front of you there is a signal that is going to quickly turn to red. Now you have two options, either to accelerate your bike and jump that signal, or maybe to slow down your bike and wait for the signal to quickly turn red and then green and then continue. I would imagine most of us would jump that signal because it is not leading to any harm. Especially when there are no cameras, most of us would jump the signal because it is not leading to any harm, because there are no people around or incoming cars. But still, there will be few people who would slow down their bike and wait for the signal to turn green. I will invoke here a very important or great philosopher from Germany. His name is Immanuel Kant, and he would approve and he would even tell the reason why the second lot of people actually waited on that signal. He would say that they believe it is their duty to wait on that signal. That duty may come from the law of the land, law of the road, or rule book, but they believe that it is their duty to wait on that signal, and that's why they have waited. And he would approve of that, right? Even if the consequence of it is maybe killing your time, irritation, and the consequence of those who jump the signal is also not bad either. Still, he would disapprove of that. This kind of reasoning is called as deontological ethics, wherein your focus is on action and whether that action is based on duty. If that is based on duty, that action will have moral worth. If it is not, it won't have any moral worth. So here our focus is not at all on consequences, because clearly there could be some action that are based on duty and it would lead to dire or bad consequence for others or for yourself. But still that action would be considered as ethical as per deontological ethics. So clearly some actions are right and some actions are wrong. Actions like lying, breaking promises, which undermine some sort of duty or some principles, would be considered as morally wrong. But is it the case? Are these actions always wrong? Let's take another example. Say you are sitting at your home on your sofa watching TV, and there is a home invasion wherein few people barge into your house and they want to take your possessions. They may be even armed and they could fatally injure you or your family. In this situation, if you have a gun and if you shoot at few people, would it be considered as unethical as per Kant? Of course not. What he would say is that you have acted as per your duty. What is your duty? To protect yourself as well as your family. So here the focus is not just on action but on duty also. So your action should be based on your duty, and then your action would be considered as ethical even if it is leading to death of a few people, right? Let's problematize this example further, and let's say that again there is a home invasion wherein a few people come into your house, they want to take your possession, they may even harm you, but not fatally. They are not armed, but you are armed. And can you kill those people? So Kant would disapprove of this because your action is disproportionate. So your action has to be proportionate. And here also you are undermining a duty, a very important duty. That is, as a human, we have to respect life of other person. This right is even provided to criminals, right? So it may lead to some consequences, right? You not shooting them may lead to, say, these people taking away your possession, but still your action would be disproportionate, right? But of course you can shoot at another person in self-defense, and that is as per duty, and that's quite valid, right, as per Kant. So basically what Kant or deontological ethic is doing is it is asking you to carry out your duty to the letter and don't worry about the consequences. Here I can take an example of a movie, Newton movie, in which Ram Kumar Rao plays a role of a government officer who has the obligation to set up a booth in a jungle for the Adivasis or the tribals to get their votes, right? Say if you are that person who has to take a register vote of a family who is living in deep jungle, right? What would you do? Because say taking the vote of these people may cost the government, right? And their vote per se would not actually uh, have any great significance in the on the result of the election. But still, it is your duty, right? So Kant would say, or deontological ethics would say, even if irrespective of the consequence of it, right? Insignificant as maybe their vote, or maybe it takes a lot of, it would lead to a lot of cost to the government. You still have to ensure that you register their vote, and deontological ethics would ask you to do that, or even Kant would ask you to do that. But Kant is the greatest contributor to this type of reasoning or deontological ethical reasoning. He has not only established this important point that your action should be based, or rather your the morality of action is far more important than consequences, the final output. But he also says one more thing. This is his very important contribution. Where he says that your emotion also are not very important when judging an action, because there are clearly few decisions that we make or some actions that we do that are based on emotion, like doing charity, right, or helping someone, and so on and so forth. They are driven by emotion, but Kant would not consider them as important or while deciding or judging a particular action. Let's take an example. You must have seen that movie Munna Bhai MBBS, where Bhumani plays the role of a doctor and a dean of a college, where he has to address the college and the students. He asks the gathering of the students, what you consider as a good doctor. There you see that in that particular scene, a girl arises and she says that I think I'm a good doctor because I love people. Wherein Bhumani again interjects and says that even I am a good doctor, but I don't love my patient. And the students are baffled. They are startled by this kind of response. What he says here is that there is a patient. My job or my duty is to cure that patient. And the emotional part of it is irrelevant over here. Whether I love the patient, whether I don't love the patient, whether I hate the patient, it is of no use over here or no relevance over here. So Kant would approve this viewpoint also. He would say, yes, you have to save that patient. That is your duty. That's it. And let's take another example. Say you save someone's life. That act of yours saving someone's life could bring happiness and joy to, say, his family, that person, maybe to you also. But that's irrelevant when we consider or when we judge that action. Your duty is to save other person, right? That's it. We will judge on only this and not the emotion that it generates in you or the other person. So these ideas like empathy and compassion, right? They are not very important. What is important is your duty as per Kantian ethics. He goes ahead and he even distinguishes between actions. So our focus is on action and action as per duty, right? But he says that not all action as per duty are moral action. He distinguishes action into two. One set of action are called as action in accordance to duty. The another set of actions are called as action for the sake of duty. Let us understand it with an example. Say you do an experiment wherein you go to shopkeepers and you buy a few things and you forget to get the change back, right? You buy things, you pay them money, but you deliberately don't take the change back. You see what would be their reaction. Say one shopkeeper calls you back and he gives you money. The other shopkeeper also calls you back and he gives you the change back. But the motivation in their head, the shopkeeper head, are different. If you could in some way or the other find out the motivation, right? One person's motivation is that if I don't give back the change, it would bring harm to the reputation of my shop. I may even lose a loyal customer, right? So his motivation is clearly self-interest. Whereas another shopkeeper who is calling you back to give you change, his motivation is as simple as that it is my duty to give back change. This is the right thing to do. So these two set of actions are nothing but action done in accordance of duty and action done for the sake of duty. Those actions that are done with motivation of self-interest or avoidance of harm are called as action done in accordance of duty, and these actions have no moral value. Whereas those actions that are done with the motivation that this is my duty and this is the right thing to do, those actions are called action done for the sake of duty, and Immanuel Kant would say that these actions have moral worth, right? So in both cases you are acting as per duty, but your motivation and intention actually gives any moral value to your action, right? So Kant basically says that these duty are not just some some sort of advisory to you. They are command. You have to follow them, right? These obligations are, these duties are not just obligations, they are command. Wherein he used this word categorical imperative. Imperative is nothing but command, and categorical is unconditional command. So there are two types of imperative in your life. One is conditional and second is unconditional. Conditional imperative are called as hypothetical imperative, and unconditional imperatives are called as categorical imperative. Let us understand with an example. Say your father tells you that you have to work hard, right, if you want to be successful. This is a conditional command, right, or conditional imperative or hypothetical imperative, wherein if you don't work hard, you may lose in your life, you may not be successful, right? So there is a condition involved. But if, say, your father says, never cheat in your exam, right? That is an absolute command. It is not coming with any condition. So if you cheat, you may go to jail. If you cheat, you may lose your respect. Nothing of that sort. It is just that purely that you have to follow this command. It's an absolute command. irrespective of what consequences it would have. That is called as categorical imperative. And when Kant talks about duty and obligation, he sees it in these terms only, that there are some commands that are based on duty that you have to follow irrespective of what consequences it would lead to, right? And how to identify this command? He gives two important formulas or principles that will help us to understand what action are moral actions, right? So the first principle that he gives is principle of universality. What does this mean? Is that your action will have moral value or moral worth if the principle behind it can be universalized. So if principle on which moral agent acts cannot be universalized, then that action has no moral worth. Let's take an example. You must have heard the story of Robin Hood, wherein this chap, what he does is, he's a dacoit. He takes the money from the rich and distributes in the poor. Some people may consider it as a moral act, but Kant would not. Kant would say that this principle, the principle behind this act, what is the principle? That taking money from someone and giving it to other, if it is of it leads to good, would be considered a moral, right? This principle cannot be universalized. If you try to universalize this principle, it would lead to chaos in the world, right? Because if everyone thinks that this is a moral thing and they steal from other, right, then that would lead to chaos and collapse of society, right? So if any action and the underlying principle of it cannot be universalized, then that action is of no use or it has no moral worth, right? Only those actions which could be universalized, those actions are called as right action or moral action. Let's take another example, the positive example. Say helping a friend. So helping a friend, what is the principle behind it? That you should help people who are in need, right? This principle can be universalized and most of the people would accept it and it would lead to benefit to the society. It would not lead to collapse of society. So any action, right? The moral worth of it will depend on whether the principle underlying that action can be universalized or not, right? This is one principle that helps us to understand what kind of categorical imperative we have to follow. Second is principle is called as formula of the end. What it means is that when we deal with humans have inherent value. And if humans have inherent value, we should not consider them as means. We should consider them as end or final goal. If in any way we consider them as means, right, all those actions wherein we consider other human being as a mean, those actions are immoral actions. All those actions where we consider other person as an end or a final goal, those actions are moral actions. Let's take example, say paying fair wages. So we all work for someone or the other, right? And the person who are our employer, if they consider us as just resource, as just a tool to make profit, and don't consider our well-being, maybe not by paying our fair wages, not giving us say a good working condition. For example, the recent rise of gig economy, the platform workers, the Ola, Uber, these people are not given their fair wages, they're not safe conditions, they are continuously monitored, right? So here the aim of these platforms or this company is deriving as much profit as possible, and they are seeing the employees as a tool. So they are seeing them as a mean and not as an end. So that sort of action would be considered as an unethical action. But where say employer wants to make profit but at the same time ensures that the person whom they have employed get proper due for their work, they get good working conditions, safe conditions, maybe bonus at times, right? They are seeing also the well-being of their employee, right? This sort of action will be considered as moral action. Why? Because here you consider another person's inherent value and consider them as an end, not just mean, right? So these two sort of principles help us to understand the various categorical imperatives, or help us to understand what sort of action are called as moral or what sort of action are called as immoral. So let us take some alternative view, or probably we would like try to criticize these deontological ethic as well as Kantian theories. The first criticism of this theory is that it is very rigid, right? Say there is a situation wherein you could save someone's life by saying a lie, right? That would be considered as immoral, right? So in extreme situation, lying to save a life, right? This theory does not give any room or any scope for that, right? It is very, very rigid. Secondly, it neglects consequences, and in our life we do give a lot of importance to consequences, right? So it seems to be quite unrealistic, Kant's theory, right? Apart from that, the duties that we are talking about, the duties could also conflict, right? You may have a duty to be always truthful, but at the same time you may have duty to protect your family, and they may come at odd or may come in conflict. Kant's theory does not give any solution to such conflict in duties. And also emotion is outlawed in Kant's theory, right? But many of the actions that we see in our world, which are considered morally valuable, at times are based or driven by emotions like compassion, empathy, care, and so on and so forth, right? How can you outlaw emotion from the assessment of moral value of that action? Then this theory is very abstract also, right? Because it considers human as very rational, right? Who can think of right and wrong in a very clear manner. It does not see the kind of inequalities, right? The master and slave, they can have different view about morality, and that could still be justified, but Kant would not agree with that, right? So it ignores all sorts of social pressures that we have, or inequalities, or even psychological constraint, right? Next, it also does not care about cultures. Something may be moral in one culture may not be seen as moral in another culture. But Kant would not uh, grant these variations. He would say that any action that is not universalized, right? The principle behind that action is not universal. That action would be unethical action. So in this case, wherein we see that the actions are judged differently in different societies, Kant would not approve of that, which is again a very unrealistic thing, because every society has a set of belief that actually help us to understand what is seen as right and wrong in those societies. But we are basically talking about moral relativism. Next, it is also problematic in terms of emergency situation, like war, maybe in terms of crisis, in terms of disaster. We do focus on consequence more than, say, duty, right? And especially when we have to work on a mission mode approach, we have to focus on consequence more on rules, regulations, and duty, right? And finally, it seems unrealistic. Why? Because people do consider personal harm and social harm while taking into consideration any action, right? So these are some criticisms of this action, or rather this theory. I hope you have understood deontological ethics and the Kantian contribution to this deontological ethics. If you want to learn more, and if you want to take up a course, you can definitely avail our course. One of the most cost effective and result oriented UPSC courses that we have for general studies, for optionals and state PCS. You can definitely look into it. You can call us or drop an email. So that's it from today's session. Let's meet in the next section, and let's learn few more things on ethics and morality in the coming sessions.